The Illuminate Arts and Faith Conference in Chattanooga, Tennessee wants to help you find your tribe. Do you get way too excited about quoting Wendell Berry or C.S. Lewis in conversations with coworkers? Does your Spotify playlist include hymns, a little jazz, and a whole lot of Andrew Peterson? Join your tribe at Illuminate March 31 and April 1 for education and inspiration from speakers Russ Ramsey, Douglas McKelvey, John Hendricks, and others. Find a complete list of session topics and ticket information at southern.edu/illuminate.
In 2024, I set out to meet as many poets as I could and spend an hour with each one. I got more than I bargained for, more insight, more clarity, more hope. It's proved to be one of the richest highlights of my life. 17 writers, 17 deeply human conversations that made me sit up and pay attention. Franz Kafka once said, if the book we're reading doesn't wake us up with a blow to the head, what are we reading for? A book must be the axe for the frozen sea within us. And that's what I hope this new book will do. I hope it wakes us up, my friends. I hope these conversations will be the catalyst for something to be reawakened, re-enchanted, and reinvigorated. It's called An Axe for the Frozen Sea, Conversations with Poets About What Matters Most. I'm Ben Palpin, and I hope you'll come and listen in as I spend a little time with poets like Lucy Shaw, Malcolm Guite, Dana Gioia, and Lee Young Lee. Pull up a chair at the table as we dig into what it means to write well and to live well. An Axe for the Frozen Sea is now available from Rabbit Room Press. Visit the store at rabbitroom.com, or better yet, ask about it at your favorite bookseller.
One of the things that I think about a lot is how much sort of pressure there is on people to look up, be optimistic and look ahead. And I think when I say today I'm here, it enables me to look down. And I think there's like so much beauty and power in being able to look down and like actually embracing that as a way of being. Is I'm looking at my feet. I'm looking at where my feet are.
Welcome to the Habit Podcast, conversations with writers about writing. I'm Jonathan Rogers, your host. Lori Ferguson Wilbert writes about spiritual formation, faith, culture, and theology in life. She's the proprietor of an excellent Substack called Sayable. She's also been known to teach writing and do editorial work. Her new book is The Understory, an invitation to rootedness and resilience from the forest floor. In this episode, Lori and I talk about what it means to really believe that death can't help but give rise to life. We also talk about mycorrhizal fungi. All right, Lori Ferguson Wilbert, I'm so glad to have you on the Habit Podcast today. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Jonathan. Thanks for having me.
And I'm excited about your book, The Understory. The subtitle, An Invitation to Rootedness and Resilience from the Forest Floor. Let's start there. I mean, that subtitle, an invitation, I'm interested in that word, invitation. But we may or may not get to that. Forest floor. Why did you write a book about the forest floor?
Initially, the subtitle was Field Notes on Grief from the Forest Floor. So it was more about grief than it was about an invitation. But I wrote about the forest floor because specifically because the tallest tree in New York fell a few years ago, not far from where I live. And a friend and I hiked back to it. And it was this magnificent, several centuries old tree fallen in the midst of this grove. And I just remember feeling so sad seeing this tree having fallen. And when I went home, I researched the tree. The tree is named Tree 103. And one of the things that a nearby forestry professor said about Tree 103 was dead, yes, but I prefer to think that she's just not vertical anymore. Yeah. And I think that made me think about what it means to not be vertical, to be horizontal, to be laid out. Mm-hmm. And when we're laid out, we look down. So I looked down and I loved what I found there. Found a lot of death there, found a lot of decomposition there, found a lot of life there. Mm.
Yeah. You quote the poet James Galvin, a tree's strength is its ability to die. Mm-hmm. Which I guess, to say, what does that mean? That's kind of the whole book is what that means.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Nevertheless. What does that mean?
Yeah, I mean, like when I think about plant life, like their whole this the beingness of plants is that they that they grow and wilt and die and cause new growth to come, and that's the plant life cycle. And the strength of the strength of a tree being willing to die is, I mean, as much as a tree can be willing to do anything, I think is a strength that we can all learn from. And that's just a willingness to be a part of those life cycles. I think we can sort of plant our flags so deep into the grounds of individualism and the American dream, or the Christian nationalist dream, that we sort of, we forget that we're part of a long line of things that die too, and are part of a life cycle.
Yeah. How comfortable should I be with that? Right. I mean, it is true. I mean, that's true that a dead tree gives new life, but the tree's still dead.
Well, Dr. Waskowitz would say it's just not vertical anymore. And so I think I make the argument that tree, it's a centuries old tree, and it's going to give to the forest for centuries to come, even forever, for eternity in some ways. The nutrients that it becomes a resting place for, the fungi that grows on it and within it, the dirt that it will become, the forest matter that it will become, the new growth that will grow upon it. It's all part of, it's always here, which is the argument that I'm making, is that even though we may appear to be dead, we are still always here in a sense. And our work is not to be trying to live forever, or hold on to what we value forever, but to sometimes let it go and see what new might come from it.
Yeah. You, I mean, so much of this book is about grief. I mean, as you said, your original subtitle was,
Field Notes on Grief. Yeah.
And you, by the way, did you decide to change the subtitle, or did a publisher or editor?
Publisher, yeah.
Yeah. So I figured. But I'm paraphrasing, and you can help. You can tell me if I get it wrong. But you say at one point, when you're grieving, so often you think, what's going to make this better would be if I could get that thing that I'm grieving, I could get it back.
Yeah.
And you've come to realize that you have to lean into and look forward to whatever is next. The grieving process, and I'm borrowing this from Mike Cosper's book. It's really a matter of facing reality, of deciding not to keep telling that story of there's an old normal that I've got to figure out how to get back some way, and rather saying there's a new normal. Is that a fair summary of what you're saying about grief?
Yeah, I think so often the thing, like the crux of our grief, is because we want the old thing back. Like that is why grief is so difficult to move through. And I don't think it's wrong to want the old thing back again, or vestiges of the old thing back again. But we don't get that. And really, if we can step back from our grief for a minute, why would we want that? Wouldn't we want something better?
So I take it you're talking about something besides grieving a dead loved one. Right. I mean, I can see how I want my dead loved ones back.
Yeah. I think okay. I have a younger brother who was killed in an accident, and there's a part of me that wishes he could have grown all the way up and
Mm-hmm.
that he was a part of my life today. But when I think about, and what I'm not saying is that we, in the throes of grief, need to be thinking, well, he's in a better place or everything
Mm-hmm.
happens for a reason, these sort of cliche things that are said in those moments. But when I think about all of the things that have transpired in my life because of his death, as a direct result of his death, I think I'm grateful in a strange kind of way that I walked through that crucible, because it gave me language, and it gave me insight maybe into the grieving that would come throughout the rest of my life. Like, I know that there's another side to it. And I know that the other side, as challenging as it may feel sometimes to not have that brother in my life, I wouldn't be who I am today.
Yeah.
Without that loss at a pretty pivotal time in my life.
Yeah. Yeah. You talk about nurse logs, right? The logs that are nursemaids, you call them nursemaids.
Mm-hmm.
The trees that fall in the forest, and as they decompose, they give new life. And I'm not clear on the terminology. How's a nurse log just different from a log that is decomposed?
That's what they are.
That's what it is. Okay, but you're saying, but a nurse log actually has the other plants growing out of it while it still is more or less in the shape of a log, right? Is that the idea, or is it just?
Yeah. So when you're walking through a forest and you see, we call them like fairy forests, so you see sort of a bed of moss and maybe some little blossoms or birches coming up, or ferns.
Yeah.
That log is it's like an incubator. It's giving all of its nutrients to the new life that's coming up upon it. Sometimes you'll be walking in a forest and you'll see a straight line of trees that are all the same, and it wasn't because someone planted them there. It's because there was a log that was straight that gave them life, and that's why it's there. So yeah, scientists say that naturally fallen logs are some of the most essential parts of a healthy forest. More so than the canopy of trees, more so than lichen or mycelia or any of those things. But a nurse log is actually, it's like a NICU nurse.
Yeah. Okay. So do you apply that idea of a nurse log to, say, your brother's death? Or do you have some other application in mind when you talk about nurse logs?
Yeah, I mean, I hadn't been thinking of that specifically, but yeah, I think there are ways in which, his death became the ground in which new parts of me were sprouted. Yeah. I think I was speaking more specifically in the book. I'm speaking of nurse logs more specifically as just like the ways that we feel not vertical anymore are still producing something. We are still producing something, and our strength is, as the poet says, in our ability to participate in that new life, even though it means the disintegration of our former selves.
So the new life that's springing up is your life out of your death.
It could be.
Yeah.
Could be.
I think you become your own ecosystem.
Yeah. I mean, really, we are all our own ecosystems in a sense, right? We are all sort of carrying our own griefs and the griefs of others, and our own pain and the pain of others, and it's resulting in my ecosystem, which is different than your ecosystem, and
like the gut biome.
Yeah, it's like the gut biome. Did you watch that new documentary on the gut biome?
No, somebody was telling me about the gut biome recently.
Oh, yeah, there's a new documentary on Netflix about it. I'm not going to give any spoilers, but there's some pretty strange things happening.
Okay. All right. Maybe I'll have to check that out. Well, all right. Since you mentioned lichen and mycelium, tell me about. You make the case that the mycorrhizal fungi.
You can say fungi. Some people say fungi.
Okay, I didn't know what the right way to say that was. Yes. You speak of them as sort of figuring the kingdom of God.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me more about that. Tell me what I'm having to read it here. Mycorrhizal fungi.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's a sort of connective tissue of the forest, and there's miles and miles and miles of it. I mean, you can read far more learned people than I on these things. Merlin
is the mycelium that you see in the
so
the documentaries and things.
Peel up a little bit of earth, and you'll see all those little white sort of tangles. Well, they're all sort of. They're not just feeding themselves, like they're not just underneath an evergreen feeding the evergreen. They're also feeding the birch and feeding the alder and the walnut and whatever. And so it's kind of like a selflessness that's happening in this sort of relationship of connectivity. And I find that really fascinating. And I think I liken it to not to make a pun, but I liken it to sort of the relationships that we can have in the kingdom of God, which is that we are like nourishing those who are not us, and sometimes not even like us, and sometimes perhaps even seeming like our enemy or our competitor for space in the forest. And yet that is the work that mycelia does. And the healthiest forests have vast networks of the mycelia. And so it says to me that a healthy and vibrant kingdom is going to be a really diverse one that's being nourished by a selfless organism who we might call Jesus.
There are so many ways to sort of build our own kingdoms. And then if you were to succeed, you'd be the king or the queen of a pretty puny kingdom.
Yeah.
Or monarchy or whatever,
it's like when you see those pine plantations that are just like spindly pines with nothing else. It's not a flourishing ecosystem.
Yeah. And I love that idea. I mean, when you speak of the kingdom of God as being similar to this this diverse forest held together by the mycelium. I'm just reminded that when we are selfless, when we do put others first, what we end up doing is creating a world that's more like the one we want to live in. I mean, which is the kingdom of God.
Yeah. It's so much more. It's like an entire. It's the difference between walking through like a pine plantation where it's not diverse and those pines are clearly not healthy, or they're just being produced so that they can be consumed, and walking through an old growth forest. It's like an entirely different experience in every way. It's a different sensed experience, and it's different.
Sure.
I think even I would even say it's a different, like almost spiritual experience that we're going to have in those two places. And it makes me, and I'm not saying that my longing to be in an old growth forest is somehow more superior than someone else's longing to be in a less diverse forest. But there's something really, really almost, I think spiritual is a really good word for it. Like it's an almost spiritual experience to walk through these sort of wild, seemingly overgrown spaces.
Yeah. I know you're partial to northern forests, but there's a book.
Oh, I like some southern forests.
Yeah. Do you know the book Ecology of a Cracker Childhood about the longleaf pine forests in
I'm gonna write it down.
Deep South? Yeah, it's great.
The Deep South has some really lovely forests. Just to be clear. What was it? Diary of a.
It's called Ecology of a Cracker Childhood by Janice Ray.
Okay.
JANISSE RAYE.
Okay.
I guess this is the sort of thing one might do while not being recorded for a podcast, but nevertheless.
I mean, I love recommending books and sharing those recommendations with others. So why not?
It alternates between the human culture of South Georgia and the forest culture of South Georgia. So anyway, great book. Okay, I want to talk about this idea. You draw a distinction, an important distinction. You said, I'm paraphrasing here, but one way of focusing your attention and your energy is to remind yourself, tomorrow I might die. Right? Whether that's with your death head skull, your memento mori, or your YOLO, whatever. But you suggested it may be more helpful to say, today I'm here. Not just I may die tomorrow, not live like it's your last day, but today I'm here. Why is that important to you? And I'd be interested to know how that has affected the way you do your creative work.
That's a really good question. I think that there's an inherent anxiety in that first statement, tomorrow I might die, or you only live once, or FOMO, fear of missing out. There's like some anxiety there. And I think living from a place of anxiety, it's essentially living from a sense of scarcity, right? And we're going to come to the end of that pretty quickly.
Yeah.
We'll run out of, it's not an endless supply. Neither is it an endless supply to say, today I'm here.
Yeah,
because all I'm doing is saying, well, today I'm here. And
you're not commenting on tomorrow. Yeah.
But I think that being able to say, Wendell Berry has this beautiful line in his poem To Think of a Life of a Man, where he says, at peace and in place. And I love that line. It's one of my favorite lines. Just this idea that like, I'm here today, and therefore what's in front of me today is what I'm called to do today. And I'm at peace with this place that I'm in today. And I think that does the opposite of anxiety for us. It produces a sense of settledness. Even if tomorrow I'm not here, or tomorrow I'm somewhere else, it produces a sense of, I think, awareness of our surroundings. Frees us up to notice a little bit more what's around us. I think that one of the things that I think about a lot is how much sort of pressure there is on people to look up, be optimistic and look ahead. And I think when I say today I'm here, it enables me to look down. And I think there's like so much beauty and power in being able to look down and like actually embracing that as a way of being. I'm looking at my feet. I'm looking at where my feet are. Andrew has that beautiful song on the new Porter's Gate album, Centering Prayer, where he sings about being where your feet are. And it's just really beautiful. I love it a lot, because I do think there is, well, to use their language, there is a centering that happens when we sort of let ourselves ground into where our feet are. And that's not to say you can't do beautiful things with your life by saying, today I'm here. In fact, I might argue that you might do more beautiful things with your life by saying, today I'm here.
Yeah. Today I'm here. Here's what I can do. And you string together a few of those, you can do something, big, important, meaningful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a line in one of the, I think I quote it in the book. I wish I could remember who said it, but he said, instead of going from here to there, I go from here to here to here.
Oh, yeah.
And I really love that idea that like life is not about moving from A to B to C, but it's moving from here to here to here.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I always say, no, you can't write a book. You can only write a sentence and then another sentence and another sentence. And eventually you've written a book.
Yes. Yes. I love that. And I think, someone told me years ago that there are two kinds of writers. There's a writer who, I hope it's okay if we like talk about writing for a minute.
That's an
on
excellent
this writing
idea.
Podcast. There are two kinds of writers, and one is an expert who wants to tell everything that they know, and the other is an explorer who wants to bring people along on their adventure.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of writer I want to be. And that this book was very much that kind of experience where I really felt like I could not borrow tomorrow's work today as I wrote it.
Yeah. And of course you're always free to go back and reorganize the things that you've done today and today and today.
This is true.
But you don't have to borrow trouble.
Yeah.
Each day brings enough trouble of its own. Did you, I know you wrote in this book about taking a sabbatical. Did you start this book or write this book during your sabbatical?
No.
One of your sabbatical, I think, was that you didn't really do anything.
Yeah. I mean, one could argue that should have been the point going into my sabbatical. However, I, like many people going into a sabbatical, thought of all the things I'm going to get done on this sabbatical.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think the most surprising and ultimately like one of the best gifts from the sabbatical was my absolute inability to produce anything. And to come to the end of that and not have anything to show for it has been really one of the best gifts of the past 4 years or so.
Yeah. Was that a choice not to do anything? Not to accomplish anything?
No, I think, well, I mean, was it a choice? I met with my spiritual director at the beginning of it, and I was lamenting the fact that I was doing it in the winter because I felt like, man, if it was the summer, I would be in the garden and I would be kayaking, I'd be taking hikes, and I would have all these things to do. And she gently pushed on me and said, what if the point isn't to do? What if the point is just to be? And so yeah, in a sense, I guess it was a choice. It was a choice I made. But I think it was also a choice that was given to me as a challenge. Yeah.
Yeah. You say it was a gift. What was the gift of that kind of idleness? Am I being provocative by calling it idleness?
No, actually, I thought about it for a minute and I was like, I don't really, why do I not like that word? Yeah. But then I thought about it and I'm actually, I that is what it was. And I think at first I didn't like that word because I think of like idle hands or devil's whatever. Yeah. But I also think like, it doesn't have to be that way. And it wasn't for me. Like the idleness led to, I think, some like deep thought that I had not had the time and energy to give to some things before. And that was really, really good for me. I think another thing that was really good for me was, as a writer, we're always being told to grow our platforms and things like that. And I just had gotten to the point where I was so dissatisfied with these social media platforms, the way they made me feel, the way they made other people feel, the pressure that I felt to perform, the pressure I felt at all to be on them. And being off of them for 4 months, it like broke something in me. And so I have a very like detached relationship with it all now. And I'm on them if I want, but I feel no pressure to. And that was really, really good for me. And I think it's been really good for my work. I think another thing that it did for me was I think when you're in a space where you're used to producing something that has eyes on it somewhat immediately, you can kind of get used to, you can kind of become a little bit of a dancing monkey,
Yeah, sure.
Like Will write for claps.
Yeah.
And I think it was just like so helpful for me to step out of that space and I think even though I didn't work on the understory in that sabbatical, I didn't work on anything. I think the fruit of it led to an ability to write a book that I actually really loved writing more than my other books. And I think, and I hope and I pray it's a better book because of that. It definitely feels more like me, like more like the kind of book I like to read than some of my previous books felt. So yeah, I think the gifts, I mean, I could go on and on. The gifts felt endless for me.
Yeah. Quick question. What's the difference between a spiritual director and a counselor?
Oh, that's a really good question. So
I feel like it's something I should know, but I don't. So,
well, I think in the Protestant tradition, which I think you're Protestant, spiritual directors are not quite as common. They tend to definitely be from a more of a Catholic or high Anglican space. Spiritual direction is a centuries. I mean, it's been here for more than 1,000 years, and I think a spiritual director can fill many different shoes. I think for me, in my experience, a spiritual director is someone who helps me get quiet and listen to Jesus. Sometimes I just need someone with me who helps me go to those dark places and I think counseling and therapy is incredibly helpful, and it's helpful to have a counselor who will help me identify my feelings or my pains, or help me to get out of difficult ruts and things like that. It can be really helpful. The spiritual director is more someone who says, let's listen to Jesus about that, and let's hear and see what Jesus might do. So they sort of help with that, I would say, more healing process, whereas counseling might give us more tools, maybe. Whereas spiritual direction, I think of as more of just sort of a spiritual relationships that helps me see my belovedness in a way that maybe counseling doesn't. Depends. I mean, some counselors might be really good at that.
Yeah, right.
But yeah. Also, a therapist has gone through many years of schooling, and a spiritual director has only gone through a few years of training. So I just don't think they're equipped in the same way that a counselor would be.
Okay. Can we talk about Jung Kwan?
Yes.
I loved her. So tell the story of Jung Kwan.
Yeah. I'm assuming you've seen the episode.
No.
Oh, you haven't?
I've only read your book.
Oh, have you seen Chef's Table?
No.
Oh, Jonathan, it's so good.
Yeah?
Yeah, it's so good. It's on Netflix. It's one of my favorite sort of, it's like beautiful storytelling, a beautiful narrative, and beautiful photography of food and people. It's just, it's a really great show. Anyway, so Jung Kwan is she's a Buddhist nun, I guess I think they're called monks still in women are called monks anyway, she's a Buddhist. She's in a Buddhist monastery, and she has been making fermented foods for her entire life, and she is working with fermented yeast and products that have been around for centuries.
Wow.
And so Chef's Table, sorry, back up a little bit. Chef's Table sort of tells the story of Michelin chefs all over the world. So it's just generally it's people who are running restaurants or they have 5-star restaurants or 3-star whatever. Anyway, so Jung Kwan is different. She's not a Michelin chef. She's not running a restaurant. She's working as a nun in a monastery. and she's making fermented foods. And her food is, it's been written about in the New York Times and Food Review and all of these places. And she's just well known for her fermented food. And the thing about her food that's so spectacular is that it actually, it's made spectacular because of time, not because of really anything else but time. And so I love that story. I love the story of how we think our spectacular things will be made with all sorts of things, but we don't want them to be made with time.
Yeah.
We want them to be quick. And she pushes back against that in her very, very quiet Buddhist nun sort of way.
Yeah. And the people who eat her food are just her fellow residents of the monastery.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think occasionally someone will get to come in and visit the monastery. And that's how like a food critic has discovered her and written about her. But one food critic says the essential ingredient is time.
Yeah. And you remark with regard to this cook, to John Kwan, that creativity and ego don't mix.
Yeah. I think she said that.
She said that. Okay.
I think she said that. Yeah, I really loved that. Because I think, I don't know about you, but it feels oftentimes, and I'm guilty of it myself, when you run in sort of creative circles, there's so much ego mixed up with it all. And there's, envy and competition and I think it really squashes the beauty of what can be created. One of the reasons that I really love, and I'm assuming most of your listeners have experienced a Behold the Lamb concert with Andrew Peterson and company. One of the reasons I really love that show so much is the way that Andrew promotes and speaks of his fellow musicians, and that showcases them all. And I think it's just the total lack of ego that we see up on that stage. And I think that's just incredibly beautiful. And it's such a good example to all of us as creators that the best work is often collaborative, and the best work is often not by us alone.
Sure.
John Kwon is talking about using this yeast that has been around for centuries. Like it isn't just hers. It's been in the air, and it's in the monastery, and it's been used by members of the convent for years. And so there's this sort of collaborative work that's happening there.
Yeah, I love it. Well, I'm trying to ponder that idea that creativity and ego don't mix, and I think I would say they mix the way that you can shake up oil and water and make it kind of mix, but then it settles out. And I think there are ways. I mean, I think ego can lead to some impressive creative work, but I don't think it's sustainable, and it's not the kind of thing that then becomes the basis of a life that is really going to make the person who did the work happy. It's just going to make them a little more insecure and a little more, there's always somebody who does a little bit better work than you, and then if you do make it to the top, then you've got imposter syndrome to drag you down. And so I also think there are two ways to think about that idea of ego. One is arrogance. The other is just that part of our brain that we're in control of. And if you do the work for long, you come to realize that the good stuff comes from that part of your brain that you're not in control of. And so as long as you're living in your ego, you really are limited to your ego. Yeah. And even if you're a genius, you're still limited to that geniusness.
Yeah.
To whatever that part of your brain is, you have access to. I mean, that you have direct access to.
Yeah. I think I quote this in the book, but Andy Crouch says that flourishing is being magnificently oneself.
Yeah, I love that. I
wrote
that in my
it.
notes. Yeah.
I really, really love that statement, because I think sometimes maybe what might occur to us first when we hear that is like, wow, that's such an egotistical way of being. But I think actually, like, a listening life and a beloved life is so much better of a source of creativity than a me like egotistical. Yeah. So yeah, in the sense that like an ego is the self, but the self knowing who I'm just going to say knowing who I am loved, and I want to listen. I want to be I want to be tying my creativity to my listening more than I'm tying it to my like getting ahead. And that is going to lead to flourishing, because that is me being my fullest self instead of me being my biggest self or most impressive self or the self that enters the room first. It's just me being exactly who I am, which is a listener and someone who has a personality that is all my own, right?
Yeah.
Like you would not make your best art if you were trying to have my personality. Sure. Yeah. And I would not make my best art if I was trying to have yours. And so for me to make my best art, I have to be the person God has called me to be. Whereas ego, I think of, and ego is a tough word because it's, it has an actual scientific meaning, but I think of ego sort of like hubris is more like me trying to be someone else's best self.
Yeah.
Me trying to achieve what someone else has or someone else wants or what someone else is in the process of getting. Yeah. And that is hubris. That isn't me flourishing in my own self as God has created me. Yeah. So I think that's maybe how I would differentiate.
Yeah. Achilles was kind of the best ego has to offer. Right? And there was a ladder. He climbed it. He was miserable all the time. He was always mad. And then he got killed. And his life was over. Yeah. And he didn't, he wasn't exactly a nurse tree in his death, nothing much good out of it.
Yeah.
I mean, except that we're still reading, Homer this many years later. But I
mean, this goes back to Gavin's his line that says a tree's strength is in their ability to die. Like, tree's strength is in the ability to be what a tree is, which is a temporal thing and a compostable thing. And like that is their strength, to be what they are, to be who they are, exactly who they are.
Yeah. And then they give life to a whole lot of other organisms.
Yeah.
Yeah. And their life required that they receive from other organisms. Yeah. So good. All right. We got to wrap this thing up, but I want to hear from you.
Okay.
Who are the writers that make you want to write, Lori?
I've probably answered this the same every time we've done a podcast.
I don't remember what you said. So I'm sure most of our listeners will already know and think, oh gosh, how many times is Lori going to say this? But I forgot. So for my sake,
they all know. But Wendell Berry, Madeleine L'Engle, Rilke, the poet. I think those, Annie Dillard, probably.
Yeah.
William Morris, I think, not someone that most people might think of immediately, but
William Morris, the
artist,
the Mississippi.
No, William Morris. He was an artist back in Victorian England, the arts and crafts movement.
The Morris chair and all that.
Yeah. You probably know him more as an artist than a writer, but he was kind of a Renaissance person, and I loved that.
His writing makes you want to write, or his chairs make you want to
write? See, I wouldn't say his writing specifically is like the most inspiring thing ever, although it can be. I think what fascinates me about him was how like multifaceted he was as a person. He was an activist, an artist, a writer.
What kind of activist was he?
So social activism. So he was, in the age when so much machinery was happening and creation and things like that, but also sort of that time when child labor was also, there was a lot of child labor.
Yeah.
So he was speaking out about those things. And he was also sort of advocating for slow art and also advocating for the necessity of even the poorest of society having access to good art. And I find that like the whole of who he is just really fascinating to me as a whole.
Okay.
So,
I am ill-informed. American or British?
British.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Victorian England.
Yeah. No, you said that. Yeah.
You would recognize his work. He's a Morris.
Yeah, I would, because I saw an exhibit in Chicago, a William Morris exhibit in Chicago. 30 years ago. But I couldn't remember if he was from Chicago or if that just I was associated with Chicago because that's where I saw the exhibit. So
no, it's from Victorian England.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Lori Ferguson Wilbert. I'm really glad that we got to talk a little bit.
Always love having talked with you. Thank you. That means a lot. Thank you so much.
The Habit Podcast is brought to you by The Rabbit Room, where art nourishes community and community nourishes art. You can support their work, including this podcast, by becoming a member. Visit rabbitroom.com/membership. Special thanks as well to Taylor Leonard for letting us use her song Diamonds as the theme music for the Habit Podcast. You can learn more about Taylor and follow her work at taylorleonard.com. The Habit Membership is a library of resources for writers by me, Jonathan Rogers. More importantly, The Habit is a hub of community where like-minded writers gather to discuss their work and give each other a little more courage. Find out more at thehabit.co.
If you've enjoyed this podcast episode, consider joining the Rabbit Room membership. Your membership helps sustain this community, funding everything from publishing and podcasts and theater productions to events and programs that support artists who create with a Christ-centered vision. We'd love to have you on board. Learn more at rabbitroom.com/member.